Hello, brick sculptors, and welcome to Brick Sculpt. This is Chris, and today we're going to talk about trees. Now, if you watch my content, you will know that I recently went on a brief vacation, and so I had a little bit of pause in my videos. What I didn't tell you guys is where I was going. Now, I took a trip down to Charleston, South Carolina, and we drove, and we passed through many beautiful states. And one thing was on my mind. I had a fan comment a while back in one of my tree videos that I should make a Georgia pine. Now, not being from Georgia, I didn't really know what that was. And I'll tell you, driving through Georgia, that place, at least on the highway, is littered with Georgia pines. And all I could think of the entire time was, I guess I have to make one now. And so I got back and... oh, wait. Yeah, it's a tall one. The Georgia pine is a massive tree. The actual name of it is the longleaf pine, and they're very straight, tall, and have a very interesting branch pattern to them. Now, I'll show you some of the techniques I use to build this tree. There are Georgia pines that are incredibly thick around. Most of them for this height, though, would be a little bit thinner, but I wanted to keep it kind of manageable. I could have made this taller and taller, but I wanted to kind of keep it to a size that looks good on a tabletop. And let me kind of show you what I did here. So the first thing is the trunk. And this is a method I use for trunks often. I use these kind of three-sided snot pieces, and these are often on pick-a-brick, so I have a lot of them. Although I use them quite frequently in trees, so I run out a lot. And I just alternate stacking them like this. And what this gives me is basically a column with studs on four sides. That's the base of my trunk. The next step after that is I just grab a bunch of plates, and I'll often alternate. In this one I use some dark brown, I use some old school brown, different shapes, sizes, colors, all mixed together to give a little bit more texture to the trunk. And so we just start sticking stuff on there. And this is just a demonstration. I'm not actually going to finish this one out, but you can kind of see how this comes together here. By just adding pieces on it, we start to get that trunk shape. Now at the bottom, I add some pieces sticking out even further to indicate a little bit of roots, although on a Georgia pine, a longleaf pine, there's not a lot going on here. They're very slender, straight trunks, but incredibly tall trees. And as you go taller on a Georgia pine, you start to get kind of an interesting leaf pattern. They're usually quite dense at the top, but the branches down low are often quite sporadic. They have some gaps in them. It's not very full down here. And the trunk from about halfway down is just bare. And I did put some broken branches in here, which is pretty common to see on one of these pines as the lower branches fall away, possibly with weight. I don't know. These trees get way up in the air, so I can imagine they catch wind a lot. In fact, driving through Georgia, there was still a lot of remnants from that past hurricane that came through and knocked a ton of trees down. So we saw a lot of these laying on the ground as well along the highway. I'll show you kind of how I did these branches here. So for the branches, I started with this piece here, and then I put a clip on it, just like that. Next, I'll do a candlestick, and sometimes two, depending on where I'm putting it on the tree. And then I take a bar, and then I just start to randomly stick small limb pieces on there. And I put 4 on each branch. You could do more if you wanted it more dense, but like I said before, these trees are often not very full near the bottom. They're usually just thicker at the top. And then I would take this piece, stick it on my trunk, and I'll have the ability to angle it up and down like this, and then left and right like this, and get it in the position that I want it on the tree. I just did that for the whole thing. Toward the top, I used a little different technique to fill it out. But pretty simple stuff, and you have a beautiful, gigantic Georgia pine. Now, when I started talking Georgia, you're probably thinking peach tree. And believe it or not, I did not see any peach trees along the side of the highway. I wonder why. But, just for the sake of a video, let's make a peach tree. Actually, I want to make 2 peach trees, because when looking at pictures of peach trees, The first photo I saw was a beautiful peach tree in full blossom. And I thought, wow, I think I could do that. And I'll show you what I came up with. And peach trees are kind of interesting. They have a very short trunk before branches start coming out, and they're not overly big trees. Now, this is kind of a younger peach tree. They can get larger than this as far as minifig scale is concerned, but they're not the biggest trees. So you want them kind of short and stout. But I built the structure of this tree much like my Georgia pine. If we take these pieces here, this was basically the start of my branches. I just put them in line with the trunk. Now, instead of using candlesticks and a bar, I started with a 3-branch flower piece in brown. And then you can put a candlestick right in the middle of it. And then another 3-branch piece. And on that one, in the middle, I put one of these little branch pieces. And then I just covered this in a mixture of pink and white flowers. And on some of these, I even branched out even further on the end of one of the flowers to give it more depth. But that was essentially how I built this tree. Pretty cool. It is quite parts heavy as it takes a lot of pieces, but I think it's really nicely detailed. Now, of course, I couldn't build one of these that didn't have peaches on it. Next, I decided to do one ready for harvest. Now, this is about the same size tree. Obviously, we have lots of leaves and peaches on this one. And I'll show you kind of how I got the peaches in there. The technique for this is similar to this, but going back to what I did before, I didn't use the flower pieces. I used a bar piece instead to stick the leaves on. All the leaves are stuck on limb pieces. What I did is I would put 3 leaves on a small limb piece, and then I'd put 3 peaches on a small limb piece, just like that. Now I wanted the peaches a little more hidden, like they're actually in the tree. So each of these leaves was responsible for overlapping one peach. And it makes for a really nice looking full branch that I can then stick on a bar and add to my tree. Now, as I mentioned, Georgia was not my destination. This was simply a state I was driving through. I was going to South Carolina. I know what y'all are thinking. South Carolina, that's the Palmetto state. Now, I had to make a palmetto because I know everyone would be asking for it if I didn't. But that's not really the tree I was after in South Carolina. But first, let me show it to you. We take a base plate. I've made palm trees before. Palm tree, palmetto tree, I don't know if they're the same thing, but they essentially look the same. What I've never seen in Lego, I'm sure it's been done, but I've never seen it, is a young palmetto tree. And so I decided to make one. And these fern pieces, if you haven't purchased them, please do. You'll thank yourself. They are so handy. You can make so many cool things with these. And a young palmetto tree has basically got the kind of leafy trunk that you see on a normal palm tree. And then the top is just kind of sporadic, little palms going everywhere. And I wanted to do a young one just because I'd never seen one. And I wanted to do a full-size one, but this is all I had in these little dark tan crown pieces. So I had to do my other one just kind of the classic way that I always do it, which is just using the actual palm tree trunk. So there's my full-size palmetto. I do have a whole bunch of these on order, so if you want to see it full-size, maybe a future video, I'm going to have these parts. I just didn't have them for this video, but you get the point. Anyway, the palmetto was not what I want to focus on here. It is the Palmetto State, but I'll tell you right now, the palmetto is far from the most impressive tree in South Carolina. I didn't realize going that far south that the trees got better and better. And there is one tree in particular that really jumped out at me over and over and over again that I would have never expected. And that, of course, is the live oak tree. Now, these trees are all over in Carolina. They put these things everywhere. They're massive. They're hundreds of years old. They have these gigantically wide trunks. and these branches that swoop almost to the ground. Sometimes they do hit the ground, and they just reach out so far from the tree, and they're just unworldly. The branches are very curved, which I tried to mimic here. We're using lots of round pieces to kind of curve these downward, and they're shorter for an oak tree, but very stout, huge, wide trunks. We visited a plantation there to tour, and they had 84 of these trees lined up at the entrance to this plantation. It looked like the scene in Forrest Gump where he's running and the braces fall off his legs. It looked exactly like that, perfectly spaced, and these trees were a couple hundred years old. And they said that they're completely hurricane resistant because the wind goes right through them. They're not super dense. They're all spread out. They're wider than they are tall. They're very, very interesting oaks. Nothing like the oaks that we have here. And of course, as is characteristic of a live oak, you have to have Spanish moss hanging off the bottom of it. Now, if you didn't know this, sand green is the perfect color for Spanish moss. Now, I also learned while I was down there that Spanish moss is not Spanish, and it is not moss. Those are purely slang names. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But you have to have that Spanish moss hanging down. I did my best to show that with these branch pieces in sand green at the bottom. Now let me show you a few techniques I used in this tree. The first one is the trunk, and the trunk is quite similar to how I did my Georgia pine, but I had to make it really, really thick. So what I did is I used plates and snot pieces, and I just joined them together like this, making essentially a cube with snot pieces and plates. And I made mine taller. I think mine was 6 or 8 tall. It was 8 tall. But depending on the trees vary a lot. Some are really short, some are a little bit taller. Some of these trunks are massively wide and spread out like crazy. There's a lot of variation in these live oaks. But that's how I started my trunk, and then I just built off with brown pieces, just like on my Georgia pine. Now for the branches, this is a technique. If you're a longtime viewer, you've probably seen this several times on my channel, but I love to show it off because it is just so handy. I before always used to struggle with how to make these branches strong, where I can touch them and they don't fall apart. And the trick that I use is this. Let's say I take a branch piece and I want to connect it to a second branch piece, just like that. Well, this connection is not the strongest. But what you can do is I have a million of these little reddish brown branch pieces, and you can pin them together. I got these on Pick-a-Brick, didn't know what to use them for. I have an absolute million of them, and I'm so glad I did because I use them in trees constantly. Because watch this. This connection now does not come apart, and it has the plus of looking like a little bit of added branch work at the bottom. And you can take something like this, if you're doing a live oak like this, you can spread these way out because the limbs on these live oaks reach super far. So you can do a really long string of branches like this, and the whole thing is totally rigid. It's not going to come apart. Pretty cool, huh? So let me know below what you think of these trees. Let me know if you think I made them look accurate. Let me know if I missed anything. Let me know what your favorite one is. I'd love to hear from you guys. I always love your feedback. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave them below. If you guys like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm going to do more just like this in the future, and we will see you next time.